Mirthvale Hall was not a place that many spoke of, and even fewer had visited. It didn't appear on maps or in property records. In fact, it seemed to exist between locations perched delicately on the cusp of memory and mirage. Some who stumbled across it believed it had always been there, just out of sight, waiting for someone gentle enough to enter without expectation. The structure was vast, but not imposing. Creamy sandstone halls wrapped around serene courtyards, their corners softened by age. Pale lavender moss grew between the floor tiles, and the ceilings bore no chandeliers, only skylights that filtered in a sleepy amber haze. Each corridor was slightly different. Some hummed with soft tones that changed ever so subtly depending on your gait. Others echoed only whispers yours, or perhaps those long since spoken and remembered by the walls. No one knew who had built it. No one maintained it. And yet, Mirth Hall was impossibly clean, its surfaces polished by some quiet presence. Into this space walked Orla, a woman who did not seek answers or revelations. She had been wandering, not lost, but when she had stepped through the curved iron arch that led to the hall, she hadn't even realized she'd crossed a threshold. But the temperature changed. The air smelled of linen and parchment. The hush, the deep hush of a place that understands. Time settled around her like a patient robe. She wandered the first corridor slowly, unsure if she was trespassing or being welcomed, but each footstep felt lighter than the last, and the walls gave no protest. After a while, she came to a hallway with no visible end. Instead of retreating, she smiled, and she kept walking. Asterisk, the hallway eventually curved, not sharply, but like a sigh. Around its bend sat a room without a door, just an open frame that led into a chamber of soft blue light. Orla stepped inside, feeling no need to ask permission. There was a low, cushioned bench in the middle and several small tables bearing unlit candles. But most striking of all were the objects suspended in the air. They weren't floating haphazardly. They were held midair, gently spinning. A worn sandal, a silver teacup with a cracked rim, a child's mitten, a folded note with no name. None of these things belonged to Orla, but somehow they felt known. As she walked among them, she noticed her thoughts quieting, not through force, but by invitation. It was as if the air asked her kindly to think less. She sat on the bench and closed her eyes, and the silence wasn't empty, it was full, filled with the gentle pressure of thought that no longer needed articulation. Feelings that didn't demand understanding. The floating objects were not artificial. Orla's thoughts, once felt truths carefully preserved and now released. A warmth pressed gently into her spine from the bench, like the faint echo of an embrace. She felt, for a moment, that her own forgotten thoughts had returned, not to burden her, but to rest. After an hour or perhaps a minute she stood, the objects continued their slow, aimless orbits. She left the room lighter than when she entered. Somewhere in the walls, a soft bell sounded. Not urgent, just present. Mirthvale Hall had acknowledged her pause. Asterisk further along, Orla discovered a staircase that curved like the inside of a seashell, drawing her downward into a new wing of the hall. Here, the light took on a golden hue, like late afternoon held gently in place. She entered a room that, at first glance, appeared to be a library, but instead of books, its shelves were filled with teacups, each one unique, each one whole. Orla approached the nearest shelf and saw labels beneath each delicate vessel. First realization, unspoken courage, moment of letting go, held breath before laughter. She turned to find a central table where several cups sat empty on linen doilies, waiting. A plaque read, select one, pour nothing. Drink when ready. She reached for a cup labeled soft acceptance and brought it to the table. There was no teapot, no liquid yet. As she cradled the porcelain in her palms, warmth filled her chest. She raised a cup to her lips and drank. No taste, no heat. Only a sensational ripple of recognition that moved gently through her body. And with it, the sound of quiet wind chimes, not outside, within. She sat for a while, allowing her breath to match the rhythm of the invisible sound. The hall did not rush her. Time here flowed like honey on warm bread. When she returned the cup to its place, the shelf glowed faintly, not in thanks, but in receipt. She left that wing in a state that words could not hold, and so she did not try. Asterisk Orla's steps eventually carried her through a corridor lined with windows, though none looked outside. Instead, they peered into moments. In one, a child reached for a firefly. In another, an old man closed a book and sighed with contentment. Each window shimmered as she passed, like silk rustling in a slow breeze. At the corridor's end, she found a threshold that opened into the garden of collected sleep. No trees, no grass, only beds, hundreds of them spaced evenly, each gently glowing as if lit from within. They were not made of wood or metal, but something soft and yielding, like the memory of warmth. Each bed was unoccupied, but not empty. A sign read, "Here lie the sleeps that were never had, the rest that waited missed naps, the anxious midnights, the restless dawns, and how somehow this place had caught them all, kept them safe, preserved them like petals pressed in books. At the far end of the garden, she found a small bed labeled with a name she didn't recognize. But she knew it was for her. Not because she was tired, but because she was ready. She lay down and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to be part of the rest that waited. And for a time, she simply breathed above her. The garden dimmed to twilight. And Mirthvale Hall exhaled. Asterisk. When Orla rose from the garden bed, the sense of stillness followed her like a second skin. She walked not with haste, but with a softness in her limbs, as though the act of rest had loosened something held too tightly for too long. The pathways of Mirthvale Hall welcomed her once more, their walls humming with faint warmth that matched her own pulse. She moved without intention now, guided not by curiosity but by an innate recognition, like remembering the steps to a dance she never formally learned. A corridor of arched ceilings opened before her, narrower than the others and bathed in a deep, steady light that shimmered faintly like morning dew. This passage had no windows. It asked no questions. But the moment she stepped into it, the air grew thick with sensation, not unpleasant, but textured, like moving through a dream too important to forget. There were alcoves along the walls, not rooms, exactly more like pockets of space where emotions had once rested. In one, she felt the memory of longing. In another, the weightless joy of being understood. No faces, no event, just the imprint of moments long dissolved. At the corridor's end, a final room awaited. No door, no title. Yet its presence filled the hallway like a held breath. She stepped inside. And instantly, a silence so profound settled over her that her heartbeat felt distant. The room was featureless, circular, and faintly luminous, as if the light emerged not from lamps or the ceiling, but from the walls themselves, soft and alive, like parchment that remembered every word ever written. Upon it, in the center was a shallow depression in the floor, shaped like a ripple frozen midst, and within that ripple stood a form faint and reflective, like a statue made of still water. As Orla approached, the shape sharpened. It was hers, not a reflection, nor a mirror, but an echo of all the selves she had once been and all the moments she had quietly discarded in order to carry on. Regrets. Half-spoken thoughts, goodbyes left unsaid, smiles she gave when she wanted to weep, laughter that trembled too closely to fear. All of it stood before her, not as punishment but as witness. Mirthvale Hall had not judged her. It had simply remembered. at the ripple with an open palm, and the moment her skin brushed the surface, the form dissolved into light, warm, and breath-like. Then, a sensation. Not a voice, but a knowing. Memory does not serve only to keep. It also serves to release. Tears came not from sorrow, but from the exquisite relief of no longer needing to carry everything alone. She exhaled slowly. Her shoulders, which had held invisible weight for years, soft. The chamber dimmed slightly, as though bowing its head. Then, behind her, a new path, open not created, but revealed. She followed it in silence, not out of the hall, but into it, more deeply into its trust, into the parts of herself still waiting to be known, and gently remembered.